אילו פינו מלא שיר הקיים ולשוננו רינה וידינו פרוסות כנשרי שמיים ורגלינו קלות כיילות. ואילו פינו מלא שיר הקיים ולשוננו רינה וידינו פרוסות כנשרי שמיים ורגלינו קלות כיילות. אין אנחנו מספיקים להודות לך ולברך את שמך מלך מלכי המלכים, מלך מלכי המלכים, מלך מלכי המלכים. אין אנחנו מספיקים להודות לך ולברך את שמך מלכנו. אין אנחנו מספיקים להודות לך ולברך את שמך מלכנו.
אילו פינו מלא שיר הקיים ולשוננו רינה וידינו פרוסות כנשרי שמיים ורגלינו קלות כיילות. ואילו פינו מלא שיר הקיים ולשוננו רינה וידינו פרוסות כנשרי שמיים ורגלינו קלות כיילות. מספיקים להודות לך ולברך את שמך מלך מלכי המלכים, מלך מלכי המלכים, מלך מלכי המלכים. אין אנחנו מספיקים להודות לך ולברך את שמך מלכנו. אין אנחנו מספיקים להודות לך ולברך את שמך מלכנו. גם אחרי שהלכתי לך זה לא שינה, ומיד כשחזרתי הייתה לך הרגשה שאני עוד אוהב אותך, שאני כבר שלך, ואהבת ושמחת וחשבת שרציתי להיות שם תמיד בשבילך, כי ידעתי שככה זה טוב, שלשניים יהיה יותר פשוט לאהוב, כל הדרך אני לצידך. גם אני עוד שומע וגם אני לא יודע איך עושים את זה, איך שזה לא קל לאהוב ללא תנאי. והופתענו כשבא השינוי הגדול, והבטחנו תמיד לדבר, וראינו אחרי שבועות וימים שלא קל לעמוד מול הרגל. גם אני עוד שומע וגם אני לא יודע איך עושים את זה, איך שזה לא קל לאהוב ללא תנאי. שזה לא קל לאהוב.
Shabbat Shalom, everybody. I'm really happy to be here with everyone tonight after what I imagine for many people, certainly myself, was a long and busy week. We know that after the first 6 days of creation, after God went through creating the world, the Torah then tells us that God actually completed his creation of the world on the seventh day. And so immediately, a lot of rabbinic scholars are confused by this. What do you mean God completed his work on the seventh day? We thought that God completed his work on the sixth day, and that the seventh day was simply a day of rest. And so the Midrash comes in and says, well, after the 6 days of creation, after what was obviously a very busy week full of creativity, full of building the world for God, he looked around at the end of the sixth day on Friday night, and he realized that there was something that was lacking from the world. What was the world lacking? The world was lacking rest. And so God actually had to go out and create rest. Now this week, I know for many of us, has been one of the busier weeks I remember. I was joking before this that I think, if someone checks my browsing history from the week, I think I refreshed the news upwards of 1,000 times over the past, I think it's only 4 days by now. But what Shabbat really teaches us is that rest doesn't come easy. Resting from the stress, from the daily hustle to the constant social media, constant checking of the news and all of that, it's actually something that needs to go out and be created. It's actually something that we need to separate some time for ourselves and reflect and meditate and think, how this Friday night, how this Shabbat, am I actually going to be able to go out and rest? As Abraham Joshua Heschel says in his book, The Sabbath, on Shabbat we get to turn from the results of creation to the mystery of creation, from the world of creation to the creation of the world. We spend 6 days acting in the world, dealing with all of the daily trials and important things that we do in the outside world. And now, tonight on Shabbat, we have to, for each and every one of us, seek out rest. So I invite everybody, if you have any Shabbat candles, to please grab some Shabbat candles as we begin our Shabbat service tonight.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lehadlik ner shel Shabbat.
Amen.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone.
Shabbat Shalom. So very much in this idea of going out and seeking rest, We know that the Jews in Tzfat, the community that actually created much of the Friday night service, they would actually get up, they would actually go out of their homes, out of their city, to the edge of the city. If you've ever been to Tzfat, it overlooks a valley, it overlooks a river, and they would actually go out there and symbolically go and greet the Shabbat. And so this first song, Lechu Naranana, is that call to action. Lechu means let us go. So in whatever way we're capable of right now, let us go now. Let us go and imagine we're welcoming in the rest. It's not something that comes naturally. It's a very difficult thing. And so we're all urged to Lechu Naranana, come let us go out and sing. Lechu Naranana, page 130.
Lechu Naranana, l'Adonai, nari al tzur isheno, nekadma fanav betoda bizmirot, nari alo nekadma fanav betoda bizmirot, nari alo. Shiru l'Adonai, shir chadash, shiru l'Adonai, kol haaretz, shiru l'Adonai, barechu shemo, basru miyom leyom yeshuato, sapru v'goyim kevodo, bechol ha'amim niflotav. Elai, 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 yalalai, elai, 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 elai,
What might the world look like if when we go out in the world, our fundamental view is that everything we see out there is a miracle? That everything that we imagine as we're walking around in nature and in this society that humans built, what if for a second we were able to take a step back and sort of marvel in the beauty, in the miraculous nature of everything? In this next song, in Zamru, we imagine that the different facets of nature, we imagine the oceans, the rivers, the sea, and the mountains are all coming together to joyously sing God's praise. It's as if nature is a constant symphony, just talking about the joy and the godliness and the miraculousness of creation, of the fact that we're all here. As Albert Einstein once said, one could go out in the world with two fundamental worldviews. We can act as if nothing we see is a miracle, or that everything that we see is a miracle. Zamru on page 134.
Zamru l'Adonai bechinor, bechinor v'kol zimra, b'chatotrot v'kol shofar, hariu לפני המלך אדוני, ירם ים ומנור, תבל ויוש ויבד, עיני
whenever singing these Kabbalat Shabbat Zemirot, or songs, I can't help but just constantly think of the etymology of the word zamar, which is the root of so many songs. Zamru, it's the root of Mizmor LeDavid. And the word zamar actually comes from the agricultural realm. It comes from an agrarian society where to zamar, when you go out and you have a vineyard or you have a field and the extra weeds start to grow and start to get intertangled in your grapes, in your vineyard, in whatever you have to be planting. Zamar means to prune. You'll go out and maybe once a week, maybe once a month, and you'll actually have to counterintuitively often chop away at the excess weeds in order to allow the vineyard or the individual plant as a unit to grow. And this is very much the same spirit that we enter Shabbat. And we use these Zmirot, we use these songs to sort of cut away all of the other stresses and everything that's sort of keeping us from reaching this full potential of rest. Mizmor LeDavid, page 136.
מזמור לדוד, הבו לאדוני בני אלים, הבו לאדוני כבוד ועוז, הבו לאדוני כבוד שמו, השתחוו לאדוני בהדרת קודש, כל אדוני על המים אל הכבוד הרים, אדוני, אדוני, המים רבים, כל אדוני בכוח, כל אדוני בהדר, כל אדוני שובר ארזים, וישבר אדוני את עזי הלבנון, וירקידם כמו עגל לבנון, וסיריון כמו בן רעמים, כל אדוני חוצב אש, כל אדוני יכיל מדבר, יכיל אדוני מדבר קדש, כל אדוני יכול אל איילות, ויחשוף יערות, ובהיכלו כולו אומר כבוד, כולו אומר כבוד. אדוני לבב ישב, וישב אדוני מלך לעולם, אדוני רוס לעמו ייתן, אדוני יברך את עמו ושלום.
There are two things in Judaism that are likened to the relationship between spouses. The relationship that God has for humanity, for his people, and the relationship that the Jewish people have to Shabbat. In L'cha Dodi, we imagine Shabbat as personified as a bride, as a spouse. And with all the preparation, all the planning, all of the excitement that goes into that moment where you're going out and you can see the Shabbat coming in, you can see the Shabbat coming closer, and you're just so excited that you're running out to greet the Shabbat bride that you can't help but sing, you can't help but just express your sheer joy for the chance to be engulfed in this Shabbat experience. So we sing, we greet the Shabbat bride with L'cha Dodi on page 138.
לך דודי לקראת כלה, B'nei Shabbat Kabbalat Shamor v'zachor b'dibor echad Ishmianu el hameyuchad Adonai echad u'shemo echad L'shem u'letiferet ve'litila Lecha dodi likrat kala B'nei Shabbat Kabbalat Likrat Shabbat lechu v'nechad Ki mekor haberacha Merosh mikadem nesuocha Sof ma'aseh b'machshavat tchila Lecha dodi likrat kala B'nei Shabbat Kabbalat Hitareri Ki va'orech komi Ori Shir daberi Kevod Adonai Aleich nikra Lecha dodi likrat kala B'nei Shabbat Kabbalat Lo tevashי ולא תיכני מה תשתוכחי ומה תהמי בך יחסו עניי עמי ונבנתה עיר עתילה לך דודי לקראת כלה ב'nei Shabbat Kabbalat בואי ושלום עטרת בעלה גם בשמחה ובצהלה תוך אמונה עם סגולה בואי חלה לך דודי לקראת כלה ב'nei Shabbat Kabbalat
At the end of Lecha Dodi, we rise and we face the entryway, and we're welcoming in the Shabbat. And so at this time, we say Shabbat Shalom to everybody who's joining us, and Shalom to the Shabbat, Shalom to this idea, this moment of rest that we're so lucky, but is also so necessary to have in our lives. And now that the Shabbat is here, the Shabbat is upon us, we sing a Mizmor Shir Liyom HaShabbat, a song of praise for Shabbat. Mizmor Shir on page 140.
מזמור שיר ליום השבת טוב להודות לאדוני ולזמר לשמך עליון ולזמר לשמך עליון להגיד בבוקר חסדך ואמונתך בלילות עלי עשור ועלי נבל עלי היגיון בחינות צדיק לבנון יסגר, שתולים בבית אדוני, בחצרות אלוהינו יפריחו, עוד ינובון בשיבה, דשנים ורעננים יהיו, להגיד כי ישר אדוני, צורי ולא עוולת
Interestingly enough, there's a debate in Jewish tradition about languages. Mainly, what language is one allowed to pray in? And we can imagine the arguments for both sides. We can imagine the arguments that say, well, a lot of the original prayers were written in Hebrew, so maybe we should only pray in Hebrew. But actually, sort of the checkmate argument against this idea is in the Kaddish. The Kaddish is one of the central pillars of any Jewish prayer service. And actually, it's not written in Hebrew. The Kaddish is written in Aramaic. One of our holiest, one of our most important, one of the staples of the Jewish prayer service is actually written in a language that, according to the historians of languages and linguists, didn't originate as a Jewish language. And so when it comes to prayer, when it comes to connecting with our community, with God, with Shabbat, the exact language isn't important. The language and the prayers are just a vehicle that we use for a greater end. And so inasmuch as one wants to pray in Hebrew, Aramaic, English, or whatever other language comes most naturally, comes most from the heart, as the Talmud says that the real prayer isn't the words that we read, but it's the prayer that comes out of the heart. We turn to page 144 to start the Ma'ariv service with Kaddish.
יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה, בעלמדי מרח חירותי וימליך מלכותי, בחייכון וביומכון ובחיי תכל בית ישראל, בעגלה ובזמן קריב ואמרו אמן. יהי שמי רבה מברך לעולם ולעולמי עלמיה, יתברך יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל, שמי קודשה בריחו לעילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה, תושבחתה ונחמתה, תמירן בעלמה ואמרו
And everybody to rise either physically or in spirit as we say Baruch Hu on page 146.
Baruch hu et Adonai HaMevorach, Baruch Adonai HaMevorach, HaMevorach לעולם ועד, HaMevorach
we continue with Arvit Mariv on page 148. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bidvo mariv aravim bechachma potech she'arim u'betuvna mishnei itim u'machlif et hazmanim u'mesader et hakochavim b'mishmeretehem b'rakiach retzonoho borei yom v'layla golel or mipnei choshech v'choshech mipnei ohor u'mavir yom u'mei v'layla u'mavyo ben yom v'layla Adonai tzavaot shemaho El chai v'kayam tamid yimoch aleinu li'olam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai hamariv aravim.
Amen.
Before we start Ahavat Olam, this idea of everlasting love, I think it's important to reflect on the overall love that's unfortunately lacking from so many different facets of our society. We know, our tradition tells us, that the second temple was destroyed not because, our tradition tells us, the Romans simply had a superior army and the siege of Jerusalem simply overcame the army, but actually that there was sinat chinam, that among the Jewish community, among the community that was living in Jerusalem, they had so much hatred, so much divisiveness, so much ideological opposition, that they actually had a society that imploded on itself. In order to counter this, Rabbi Cook, the first chief rabbi of Israel, said that now our job is to do the exact opposite. Instead of sinat chinam, instead of baseless, or it roughly translates to free hatred, that hatred was so ubiquitous throughout a society that it was everywhere. It was as if it was free. That we need to do the opposite. We need ahavat chinam. We need to have a society and imagine a worldview in which love for each other, love for our community, love for both what unites us, and always more importantly, what divides us, that love is free-flowing. So we sing Ahavat Olam, the everlasting love in the world. It's important to reflect on what a society with Ahavat Chinam might look like. Ahavat Olam Beit Israel Alamecha, Ahavta Torah u'mitzvot, Chukim u'mishpatim otanu limdata, Al kain Adonai Eloheinu b'shkavenu uvkumenu, Nasiach bechukacha, v'nismach b'divrei toratacha, v'mitzotacha li'olam va'ehed, Ki hem chayenu ve'orach yamenu, uvehem negeh yomam v'layla, ve'avatacha al tasir mimenu li'olamim. Baruch atah Adonai, ohev amo Yisroel. Page 152 for Shema.
Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. We continue together on page 154 with Ve'ahavta. ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודיך, והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבביך, ושיננתם לבניך ודיברת בם בשבתך בביתך ובלכתך בדרך ובשוכבך ובקומך, וקשרתם נאות על ידיך והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך. למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותיי והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם. אני אדוני אלוהיכם
לכם, אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים, להיות לכם לאלוהים. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אמת.
Adonai Elohechem Emet. Ve'emunah kol zot v'keim aleinu, ki hu Adonai Eloheinu ve'ein zulatenu ve'anachnu Yisrael amo. You are our sovereign and Savior, who delivers us from oppressors' hands and saves us from tyrants' fists. You work wonders without number, marvel beyond count. You give us life and steady our footsteps. You performed miracles for us before Pharaoh, signs and wonders in the land of the Egyptians. You led your people Israel from their midst to freedom for all time. And when your children witnessed your presence, they praised your name in gratitude, and they accepted your sovereignty. Moses, Miriam, and all Israel sang to you together, lifting their voices joyously. Mi Chamocha, page 158.
כבד אדוני את יעקב, וגלו מיד חזק ממנו, ברוך אתה אדוני, גאל ישראל.
Amen. In Hashkivenu, we ask God to ufros aleinu sukat shlomecha, spread upon us your sukkah, your shelter, your wings of peace. And it's something, again, that we can all use at the moment. We can all take a moment and ask and pray that we have a shelter of peace, a sukkot. Sukkah doesn't really translate well into English. I know we build sukkot, but almost a temporary dwelling, but something that we know that while it might not look strong from the outside, we know that a sukkah represents being able to take our lives, which when we're indoors, they feel so permanent, we feel so safe. But when we really imagine, when we go out in the world, we realize that oftentimes life is really like a sukkah. Life is really like seemingly fragile. And we have to constantly be engaged in the act of prayer, in the act of really engagement and even action in order to quite literally keep the peace. So Hashkivenu, page 160.
ופרוס עלינו
Amidah quite literally means the standing. And traditionally during the Amidah, we place our feet together. And what that represents is the fact that we want to channel our attention. So often in life, our attention, our focus is divided. I have one foot here and I have one foot there. I sort of go about my day and I'm all over the place. But during the Amidah, we take a second, we stand and we put our feet together as if we have a singular, attentive focus in prayer. So please join us for the Amidah. And if you're willing and if you're able to rise physically, please rise. And if you're able to rise in spirits, we invite you to rise. But most importantly, we invite you to take your attention and just for a moment, attempt to channel all of your attention in prayer. Page 164.
Adonai sfatai tiftach ufi yagid ufi yagid tehilatecha.
We end the Amidah with a prayer for peace. We ask God, Oseh Shalom bin Romav, the one who makes peace in the high heavens, Hu Yaseh Shalom Aleinu. Please may he make peace for us. Ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'al kol Yoshvei Tevel. V'imru Amen, for all of Israel and for all those who inhabit the earth. We turn to page 371 for the Mishuberach. And we keep in mind anybody that's in need of any type of healing. We know that the COVID pandemic has been increasing in numbers across the country, across the globe, and we certainly have everybody affected by COVID in mind. We still keep in mind all of the frontline workers, all of the essential workers, all of the healthcare workers that are really out there day to day battling, engaging in a battle against the coronavirus that allows us to feel as safe as we can in our communities. And we think about everyone else, whether they're in need of healing physically, spiritually, psychologically, or whether they need healing from any sort of addiction. We have everyone in mind as we start Mishu Beirach, page 371. So we're here on Parsha Vayera, the second of the three Parshiot, the second of three Torah portions that deal with the narrative of Avraham, of Abraham, the father of the Jewish people. And perhaps the most well-known story when it comes to Abraham doesn't actually appear in the Torah, but it appears in the rabbinic literature, the Midrash. And we zoom into a young Abraham who we're told grows up in a society that's steeped in idol worship. We're told that Abraham's father, Terach, was an idol shop owner. And one day, Terach decided that he was going to go out for a little bit, and he wanted to leave Avraham, his young son, in charge of the shop. So Avraham did what every good, rebellious teenager does when he's asked to watch over his father's shop. He immediately goes around and destroys all of the idols. He rebels against everything that his father, everything that his society stood for. And at the end, Avraham kept the biggest idol, the idol in the center, and he placed the axe in that idol's hand. And when his father got back, we're told Avraham, has to answer for this mess. His father comes in and says, Avraham, what happened here? What did you do? Avraham said, well, it wasn't me. It was this big idol that did it. And his father said something to the effect of, Avraham, don't be foolish. We know that idols can't destroy other idols. And Avraham threw it back in his face. He said, okay, if you don't think that this idol has enough power to destroy all the other idols in this idol shop, then why are you praying to it? So Rabbi Nico and I brought this story this past Wednesday night to our Seekers class. And a lot of people in the class hated this story. They said that this story makes Avraham seem obnoxious. It makes Avraham seem rude. It makes him seem destructive. Surely Avraham, if he had a way of rebelling or he wanted to teach his father a lesson about idols, had a better way of doing it than completely destroying his father's entire livelihood. Furthermore, someone else suggested this seems almost like a straw man against idol worship. Right? If we were to imagine what a culture that worships idols is actually like, this probably is not the best case argument to make for a idolatrous culture. There are probably better to make. And I'll throw out one criticism of my own here. This story, we're told, is sort of Abraham's awareness of monotheism. This is sort of the moment when we're told that Abraham realizes that actually all of these other gods can't be doing anything. These gods are sticks and stones, and he comes to recognize that there's one true God, the first person in history to recognize the essential truth of monotheism. But there's another problem there. We know that earlier characters in the Torah, Adam and Eve, certainly we know Noah, the Parsha 2 weeks ago, they seem to also be monotheists. We didn't see them running around worshiping idols. So what is Abraham doing? What did Abraham essentially bring to the world? And what is the story trying to teach us? So before answering this question, I want to jump about 500 years in the future from this story, where the Jewish nation, after traveling their 40 years in the desert, after settling in the land of Canaan, the land of Israel, have their first national communal debate. And yes, of course, their first national communal debate was about politics. One side, the people, we're told, looked around at the other nations of the world. They looked to the south, they saw Egypt. They looked to the east, they saw the Babylonians. They looked to the north, they saw the Assyrians. And they said, it seems like all of these other nations have kings. Why don't we, the land of Israel, the people of Israel, why don't we have a king? But immediately, the religious leaders at the time, the prophets, specifically Shmuel or Samuel, immediately retorted back, do you guys really want a king? If you have a king, the king is just going to take advantage of you. If you have sons and daughters, the king is going to take them and use them to serve him, use them in his army. If you have a house, if you have a field, the king is going to take a part of that. The king's going to levy taxes against you. The king is going to enrich himself on your behalf. Do you really want a king? Samuel and the other prophets, the other leaders, told the people. So they engaged in the first Jewish act of compromise. They settled on a situation where, yes, there would be a king, but that king would actually be very limited in the political power of what the king was able to do. And we're finally told in Deuteronomy 17, towards the end of the Torah, actually the laws of what a Jewish king, the first sort of document that entails the Jewish tradition's brush with politics. Again, this is the first time the Jewish nation had to fend for itself, right as they got into Israel, right as they were establishing a society. And so I'm reading from Deuteronomy. When you enter the land the Lord your God is giving you, and you take possession of it, and you say, let us set a king over us, like all the nations around us, the king must not acquire great numbers of horses for himself. He must not take many wives, and he must not accumulate large amounts of silver and gold. So we're told at the outset, the first couple of rules that apply to a king, it doesn't tell us how to choose a king. It just says, God will choose. It doesn't tell us what the king has power over. The first text, the first Jewish law about dealing with a king is fundamentally limiting. It tells the king that the political leader, the king, you can't just come in and take people's horses. You can't take their vineyards. And you can't fundamentally exploit the populace. But then the text continues. The Torah says, when the king finally sits on the throne of his kingdom, he needs to write for himself a copy of the Torah. So now we're told that this king, the first thing this king has to do is actually write for himself a Torah. And this Torah is to be with him always. So now he has to carry around the Torah all day. I assume, that the Torah was smaller than the modern day Torahs we have, or else the king might get a little tired. But the king is supposed to carry around a Torah and read it every day of his life so that he may learn to revere the Lord, but also, the Torah says, not consider himself better than his fellow Israelites. The king, we're told, and political leadership, the first time the Jewish tradition was dealing with government, dealing with politics, at the outset comes out and says that the king, the political leader, needs to be constantly reflecting on the fact that the king isn't God. That if we know one thing from the Torah, if the Torah teaches one thing, it's that the Torah talks about there being one God. We know the one God created the world. There's one God that appears in every narrative of the Torah. And if I'm a king and I'm walking around and every single day I have to read this story, it will eventually seep into my head that, hey, I'm reading this book about God, and it doesn't say that there's two gods, there's not three gods, so maybe I'm not God. But more importantly, what's written in the Torah is that all other humans, the people that are going to be under this king's rule, are created b'tselem Elokim, are created in the image of God. And with this, the laws of the Torah sort of end here. It doesn't tell us anything else about a Jewish king. So for everyone at home, just as a curious exercise, there's obviously a lot missing to this. I don't think this would quite make it as a constitution in any modern country. But I'm curious if anyone wants to, you can type in the comments on YouTube or Facebook. I promise I'll check them after. What's missing here? I mean, there's a lot missing, but what's maybe the most fundamental piece, the most fundamental continuation that's missing here? So I'll give 5 seconds for sort of internal thinking here. So one of the things that a lot of biblical scholars note is, well, hey, the Torah and Jewish tradition is not shy when it wants to command people to do something, right? The Torah has a lot of laws in it, right? 613 to be exact. If the Torah wants me and wants our community to do something, it's going to tell us, hey, you should probably do this, and if you don't, here's what's going to happen to you. Scholars point out that it never actually tells the people that once you appoint this king, you need to listen to everything the king says. And this leads scholars to make a fascinating comment, a fascinating point about the Torah and its place in really human political history. That this is actually the first document that we know of to limit political power. More importantly than that, the Torah is actually the first document that we know of in history to separate politics from religion. And by that, I don't mean that religion or Judaism has nothing to say about politics, but it means that political leaders were not the religious leaders of the time, that there was almost a full disconnect. And an even further point it was making was that in a world where political leaders claim divinity for themselves, they claim to be God, the Torah is having a huge rebuff against that and telling us that in our political system, don't be fooled. Don't think that you're going to appoint a king and this king will be facading, will have this facade as being God. Jewish tradition recognizes that politics is crucial, right? Obviously, we don't have a king anymore, but the original political structure of the Israelites, whatever political structure we have in a society, it's crucial to running a nation. But when politics begin to divide, when politics are used to pit people A against people B, group C against group D, when people begin to value their political leader or a political party or a political affiliation against this idea that the Torah is talking about, that all humans were created in the image of God, they're making the exact mistake that the Torah is warning against. The Torah considers, in some sense, a form of idolatry, an idea that we would take any one individual, any party, any even idea above the foundation of ethical monotheism, above the idea that all humans are created in the image of God, the idea that when Rabbi Hillel, one of the main rabbis of the Tannaitic period, the Mishnah, was asked by an outsider, Hillel, can you summarize the Torah for me? Without even thinking, he shot back, just don't do what's hateful to yourself, don't do unto others. The rest is commentary. Regardless of what happens in our current election, which as of the time of starting Shabbat, we still don't exactly know the outcome, we know that we still have so much work to do as a society when this election is over. We have a fractured society at the moment. We have two groups that are increasingly non-overlapping in terms of conversation, in terms of the way that they see the world, in terms of even having a chance to recognize the Tselem Elokim, the divinity in each and every one of us. We know that we have an unprecedented pandemic that is still here, an unprecedented economic strain that's proliferating throughout our country. We know that there's still prejudice alive in our country, from anti-Semitism to overt forms of racism in our society. The story of Abraham and the idols attempts to answer a question. And the question is, the Torah never actually tells us why Abraham was chosen. Right, last week we read Parsha Lech Lecha, and the Torah basically starts with coming to Abraham, and saying, hey, Abraham, go. Which immediately begs the question, well, why him? Why does he get to go? What about everyone else? And so the story of the idols was one attempt to answer this question. But there's another answer that appears in this week's Parsha. It's when God comes to Abraham, God, the ultimate authority, and tells Abraham, the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah are wicked. I'm going to go down and destroy them. So Abraham could have, of course, said, okay, you're God. Of course, go destroy it. Why are you even bothering telling me? But Abraham stands tall. He stands strong and tells God, God, is the ultimate judge of the earth not going to do justice? You, God, you yourself created this ethical system where all humans are inherently important. All humans are created in the image of God. Are you yourself not going to do justice? And Abraham almost yells at God. You can almost imagine this back and forth. And when God begins to answer Abraham, when God says, okay, Abraham, you're right. I'll go down in the city and I'll check. And if I find 50 righteous people, maybe, I won't destroy the city. Abraham doesn't even stop there. He keeps pushing. 5 or 6 times they go back and forth with Abraham, almost, you can imagine, yelling at God, shocked that God, the leader, is not upholding the values that Abraham learned from God. In a historical context, we know that Abraham was alive in a world, again, where all political leaders were viewed as gods. We know that Pharaoh viewed himself as a god. We know that King Hammurabi of the Babylonians viewed himself as a god. In the creation story Enuma Elish and the Epic of Gilgamesh, all of these stories talk about humans usurping political power and with that coming religious power. And Abraham saw the injustice that entailed. He went out and he saw a society that was fundamentally stratified, that had a caste system where not only people weren't equal on paper, people didn't even believe that everybody was equal, where people's ideological and political beliefs that Pharaoh or Hammurabi was a god actually trumps the basic human dignity that's alive in the world. If Pharaoh's God, then what am I? But if we're all created in the image of God, if we all recognize each other's divinity, the inherent godliness within our fellow person, then we can begin to start to understand how to do the ultimate Jewish deed of being mitaken olam b'malchut shaddai, of repairing the world, of tikkun olam, of the kingdom of God, and not in the politics, the divisive partisan politics that humans create. Shabbat Shalom.
Neweth Aleinu on page 586.
עלינו לשבח לאדון הכל, לתת גדולה ליוצא בראשית, שלא עשנו כגויי הרצות, ולא זמנו כמשפחות האדמה, שלא שם חלקנו כהם, וגור עלינו ככל המונם. אנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא, ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ ביום ההוא, ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד, ושמו אחד.
At this time, we take a moment and we, before the Mourner's Kaddish, and we reflect on anybody who's mourning for whatever reason this week, for anybody that's in the Shiva period, the week after the passing of a loved one, for anyone in the Shloshim period, the 30 days after the passing, or a Yartzeit, the anniversary or the commemoration of a loved one. Please join me for Mourner's Kaddish on page 598. Iskadal v'yiskadash shemei Rabbah,
Amen.
v'yalma di barak hirateh v'yamlich malkuteh, v'chayechon v'yomechon v'chayed d'chol Beit Yisrael, ba'agala uvizman kariv v'yimru Amen.
Yehi Shmei Rabbah Mevarach Le'olam U'Me'el Maya.
Yehi Shmei Rabbah Mevarach Le'olam U'Me'el Maya, Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh, v'yithadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal, Shmei d'kedusha brichu. Le'ela min kol berchata v'shirata, tushbachata v'nechamata, Damina be'alma v'yimru Amen. Yehi Shalom Rabba min Shemaya v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'yimru Amen. Oseh shalom min Ramav, hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'yimru Amen.
Amen.
Before we do Kiddush, I have a couple of announcements. Monday night, November 9th, we are partnering with the Rose Project in Shir HaMaalot in a online Kristallnacht commemoration. I believe that's at 6:30, but you can find all the details on the TBT website. Another date to sort of look out for coming not this Sunday, but next Sunday is going to be Mitzvah Day, where again, there should be more information coming out and about over the next couple of days. And as I know Rabbi Nico has been mentioning every week, we have now had the second class of our Jewish Seekers, but if anybody would like to join, that takes place every other Wednesday from 6:30 to 8:30. And finally, I'll just say that over the last 6 or 7 months, I've had the pleasure of meeting a lot of you either via phone or in a Zoom class or in a conversation. But if anybody, for whatever reason, can't make any of the scheduled times of any of the classes and just wants to talk about anything Jewish related or anything else, I'm always available, and I urge you, and I would love it so much if anybody wants to talk, and I can set up a Zoom call, do the phone, maybe even outdoor coffee. So I'm gonna go run and get the Kiddush stuff, and we will do Kiddush. Vayerev vayiboker yom hashishi, vayichul hashamayim va'aretz v'chotz va'am, vayichal Elohim b'yom hashvi'i melachto asher asa, vayishbot b'yom hashvi'i mikol melachto asher asa. Vayivarach Elohim et yom hashvi'i vayikadesh oto, ki bo Shabbat mikol melachto asher bara Elohim lasot. Savri Maranan, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, borei peri hagafen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'ratzavanu. Shabbat kadsho b'yava ratzon hinchilanu, zikaron lema'aseh bereshit, ki yom techila lemikre kodesh, zecher li'yetziat Mitzrayim, ki vanu v'charta v'yotanu kidashta mikol ha'amim, v'shabbat kadshecha b'yahava uvratzon hinchatanu, Baruch atah Adonai me'ekadesh ha'shabbat. Okay, we now conclude with a special election week song from Gabrielle.
This land is your land, this land is my land. From California to New York Island, from the redwood forest to the Gulf Stream waters. This land was made for you and me. As I went walking that ribbon of highway, I This land was made for you and me. This land is your land. This land is my land. From California to the New York Island. From the redwood forest to the Gulf Stream waters. This land was made for you and me. Shabbat Shalom, everyone.
Shabbat Shalom.